Hello, BookTube. Today is day one of the 2016 BookTuba-athon. As I've researched this and looked at all the videos that are cropping up about it, it's become more and more apparent to me how impressive it is, the job that Edward VII has done, not only creating this and making it fun, but also making it a big event. It's all over social media. It's all over Instagram and Twitter. Makes me all the more eager to be involved. And the first challenge was to read a book with yellow on the cover. And as I mentioned the other day, it's a popular color in books. So I had a multitude of things to choose from. Instead of picking anything interesting, I decided to stick with the theme of this channel and pick something from history. So I reread this from 1984. It's got yellow all over it. It's Theo Aronson's Prince Eddie and the Homosexual Underworld. And it tells the story, two stories really. The main story is the Cleveland Street scandal, which rocked London in 1889, in which it was discovered that a group of telegraph boys who were usually selected by their employers for their good looks and wore tight uniforms and went all around London delivering telegraphs, were part of a homosexual brothel on Cleveland Street that was attracting some high-level influential patrons. And the London police staked it out and discovered that Lord Arthur Somerset was among many of the patrons involved. And Somerset was a good friend of the king, of King Edward. So it had all the makings of a gigantic scandal, the one that the government would want to cover up. The inspector in charge was Frederick Aberline, who the year before, in 1888, had failed to find Jack the Ripper in an area of London the size of your apartment. And the case was catnip to the press. They just went nuts about it. And Theo Aronson was this bantam-sized little cheery, chatty man who wrote a shelf of books about contemporary monarchy. Could often get members of royal families and their hangers-on and their employees to speak to him in ways they wouldn't speak to anyone else. So his books are very energetic, very much worth reading, including this one. The part of this book that is the history of the Cleveland Street scandal is fantastic. But he doesn't stop there. This yellow book has yellow journalism all the way through it, because he furthers the idea that Prince Albert Victor, King Edward's son and heir, and the grandson of Queen Victoria, was a patron of Cleveland Street, and that therefore was, secretly, illicitly, a gay predator a member of the gay underworld of London. And Aronson aggressively pursues this theory throughout his book. And eventually, about halfway through pursuing it, he just starts assuming it and going on from there about, how the prince was sent out of London for the good of the nation, how his father was worried about his homosexuality but couldn't tell his grandmother because it's just not the sort of thing you say to Queen Victoria, etc., etc. And that half of Prince Eddie and the Homosexual Underworld has not a shred of truth to it. Not one shred of truth to it. Half of this book is a wonderful history of the Cleveland Street scandal, and the other half of the book is just nonsense. Not only did Prince Albert Victor write love letters to women all the time, not only was he notorious for falling in and out of love with women, but never with men. We have documentary evidence of that. And Theo Aronson saw those letters when he was in the Royal Archives. He knew perfectly well that you can make a historical case for Prince Albert Victor being heterosexual. You can't make one for him being homosexual. Not only that, but the only indication, the only thing that links him with the Cleveland Street scandal was a man named Arthur Newton, who was the solicitor of Lord Somerset, and who was desperate to get his client off. His client fled England, and was in a high-profile enough position so that was very awkward. The king actually wondered in a letter to his prime minister and to a couple of other people whether or not it wouldn't be possible, when the whole thing blew over, that Lord Somerset would be allowed to return to England periodically. And he did return to England periodically for his mother's funeral, for instance, or to buy racing horses. The aristocracy. But that solicitor, Arthur Newton, is the only one who indicated at the time in any way that someone higher on the aristocratic food chain than his client was involved, and allegedly wrote a letter in which he used the initials PAV for Prince Albert Victor. But Arthur Newton was a notorious liar, and was eventually stricken from the rolls, the English equivalent of American disbarred. He was eventually disbarred a few years after the Cleveland Street scandal for manufacturing evidence, from manufacturing letters on behalf of his client, the notorious murderer, Harvey Crippen. And he was no different in 1889. You couldn't believe anything that he said. He went on trial himself. And Aronson chooses to ignore all that in order to make a salacious case about a side to Prince Eddie that has been covered up by the royal family and hidden from history. Even so, it's still worth reading. The whole book is still worth reading. It wouldn't be the first time that absolutely outrageous speculation was attached to the name of Prince Albert Victor. In fact, one of those speculations is dealt with in this book. Theo Aronson raises at some length and then is at pains to dismiss the speculation that Prince Albert Victor was Jack the Ripper. Not involved, that he actually was Jack the Ripper, that the grandson of Queen Victoria was stalking Whitechapel in 1888, carving up women. Despite the fact that court circulars have eyewitnesses, seeing him, talking with him, hundreds of miles away from London on the days in question. It's an absolutely ridiculous idea, and yet it's the other scandal that has attached to Prince Eddie's name. That and Cleveland Street are the only things you'll ever read about him when you read about him, because he died very soon after. He caught pneumonia and died. And the whole line of succession had to be revamped for his brother and moved on from there. We don't know what kind of king he would have been. But the point is that while he was alive, he was a little bit of a simp. He was vacant-eyed, he was pleasant, he was... people despaired of his intelligence. One of his early tutors thought he might be retarded. Not much there of interest. His brother wasn't that much better, but still, it's made him fair game for historians to attach all sorts of interesting gossip to. And it's unfortunate that when you read a biography of Prince Albert Victor, there have been a handful, not as many as I would like, you can't avoid this book. It comes up all the time, and it always will. That's what happens when someone indulges in this level of yellow journalism. It sticks with the subject forever. You have to raise the allegations, even to dismiss them as nonsense, which is a terrible waste of historians' time, but what are you going to do? So, should you ever happen to be reading about the royal house that later became known as the House of Windsor, or should you be reading about Oscar Wilde, who only 6 years after the Cleveland Street scandal went to jail for homosexuality. So it was no small thing. It was no small scandal to be attached to. Should you be reading about any of those things and this come up, or the whole Cleveland Street scandal story come up, you can refer to this video. And that's our yellow challenge for the BookTuba-athon 2016. So I'll be back tomorrow with tomorrow's challenge. Thank you, BookTube.